always kind of nice. I just like to make myself some tea and bundle myself up, and because I'm a giant English nerd, read poetry, and that's what we're doing tonight. This is September's patron appreciation video. I know I'm still behind. One day I'll get on top of it. Then I was like sick for like 3 weeks, and I was like, eh. But October's is coming out tomorrow. And then we'll be at least 2 this month, and that one will come out like next week. Well, what I did was I asked my patrons, and thank you so much to all my patrons. And if you want to be featured in these videos, you can help support me on Patreon. Anyone at the $2 level or above can submit stuff to this. We only had a few people submit to this one this week, probably because it was a bit more involved, and people, it's not just like putting your name in, it's like, because I asked for people to have poems they wanted to read, or at least topics for me to read the poems of. And that's what we did. So, because we only have a few of them, I'm also gonna go in and actually more kind of do some, I don't know, not like a full-on like breakdown analysis. I'm not gonna like go full English major on you, but I'll at least have my comments on them. So yeah, we actually have a nice spread of genres, so yeah. So first up, we're starting off with we're gonna start off with just some Shakespeare. I'm choosing this one to go first because Shakespeare's sonnets, it's the reason you learn it in school is actually Shakespeare is actually very straightforward. Like once you get past kind of like learning how to read older works and stuff that isn't in like modern plain English, once you get past that, Shakespeare stuff is actually very kind of straightforward and easy to understand. It's structured very like well, like the volta of a poem, the volta being the place where like the poem shifts its view, where it's most poems, like the vast majority of poems, have a volta, and it's the point where everything's were established in the poem, and it's like the shift in the point of view, it kind of informs the whole like point of the poem and the message that it's sending. And Shakespeare's are very kind of straightforward, while still very well crafted. You also study Shakespeare early because it's like he has great examples of like structure, both like rhyming and like beats and things like that, where it's pretty straightforward. But we're just gonna go into it. So this is sonnet 130. My mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun. Coral is far more red than her lips red. If snow be white, why then her breasts are dun. If hairs be wires, black wires grow on her head. I have seen roses damasked red and white, but no such rose I see in her cheeks. And in some perfumes there is more delight than in the breath that from my mistress reeks. I love to hear her speak, yet I know that music hath a far more pleasing sound, and I grant I never saw a goddess go. My mistress, when she walks, treads on the ground. And yet, by heaven, I think my love is rare, as any she belied with false compare. So, like I was saying, like it's very clear what the volta is. It's like the second last line. The one I'm doesn't like looking at doesn't have line numbers, but it's a sonnet, so like I'm not going to talk about structure too much. It's a sonnet. There's nothing fancy. There's nothing really. The structure is there to provide form. There's really no major breaks in the structure, at least from a first glance. You see the volt at the end there, but it's one of those things where it's like it's good for like teaching people how to like break down a poem. It's like, okay, can you identify like the number, like the patterns and things you find in it? Like, can you find it like the volta? Like, where's that shift? It's like it's essentially the speaker is being like, yeah, their mistress. Gotta be gender neutral. I mean, I like girls too. But it's kind of demeaning, and it's like, oh, so many things better to her. But like, then the shift is obviously, but actually, no, she herself, like, you can't compare her to these other things. Like, things won't look good compared to like the pinnacle of what they are. But like as a composite and things like that. But yeah, but the main thing is like that's very obvious, and that's really good for Shakespeare, and kind of just like introducing people to these things while still being actually very nice poetry. But yeah. So next up, we're going into out of high school poetry. We're actually gonna go back a little bit. This is Boa Constrictor by Shel Silverstein. Oh, I'm being eaten by a boa constrictor. A boa constrictor. A boa constrictor. I'm being eaten by a boa constrictor, and I don't like it one bit. Well, what do you know? It's nibbling my toe. Oh gee, it's up to my knee. Oh my, it's up to my thigh. Oh fiddle, it's up to my middle. Oh heck, it's up to my neck. Oh dread, it's so it's Shel Silverstein, famous children's poet, and there's a lot of like components of this where it's very simple. It's like very short lines, easy to remember. It's like it very much like the rhyme pattern is very like it makes good use of the like boa constrictor is almost like kind of its own like full like clause. It's like has enough syllables that like it dominates that and that reputation, but also like it's beneficial that like boa constrictor actually has a really good mouth sound and like rolls off the tongue. And then just like the simple like, oh gee, it's up to my knee, like very fast like couplets mixed up to each other's, and those like very easy to remember, like almost kind of like sing-song patterns are really good for obviously children's poetry, because it's kind of like easy for all that to happen. And then at the end you have it's up where you have this very much like onomatopoeic description of it, where it's words that mean things. Where it's like you wouldn't see that in like another poem, but it's kind of like it breaks what you establish and what you expect from a poem. Obviously, you would expect it if you're going to a Shel Silverstein poem, but it's you wouldn't see a word spelled U-P M M M M M M M M M M M F F F F F F F F F F F F F like that. It's perfectly exaggerated in a five, and it's like it's very nice. I'm like it also like the O dread. It's up to like based on everything it's set up. It's like okay, obviously it was supposed to be it's up to my head, but it's like having to play on things and like setting up like expectations and being able to use those expectations to like have the play on things, and yeah, no, it's a cute thing. Yeah. Next one. Shout out to forget this one. It's The Fall of Gil-galad, which is a poem from the Fellowship of the Ring. It was originally Gil-galad was this like hero back in the First War against Sauron, and Sam's singing about this, but Sam actually doesn't know the whole poem because he's just like, well, let's just sing the happy parts. And obviously this is like a plot device because it's like we didn't need to like hear about the whole thing, and that kind of builds like a lot of what it does a good job of Lord of the Rings is like really building up this like very distantness and like the like really showing that like everything about Sauron was like this ancient glorious past. Like it's all of the Lord of the Rings is very much it does a good job of showing that let's like like the world is actually kind of like not just like not great because there's evil around. It's like evil's always been around Middle Earth, but it was like it's past the age of mighty kingdoms and everything. Like everything is in ruins. Like the entire like journey of the Fellowship, they're just walking through these ruins of civilizations that have collapsed. It's in many ways it's not like quite like post-apocalyptic, but it actually often feels like that in a lot of ways, where it's just these like they're walking through like the outland, like the borderlands of Gondor, and it's just like all these just like abandoned like citadels and towns that are being taken over by obviously like dark forces and stuff. And the movies don't showcase like just how like desolate Middle Earth is in a lot of ways and how empty it is. And it's like also like how we're reading in The Hobbit, where we're reading all these lands and stuff, that like this route that they're taking wasn't always this like treacherous road. Like this used to be like a major line and is like with like trade and everything, but it's just become the wilds have spread back in. And it's poems like this, which I realized I've started doing analysis after before I read it, really kind of help establish like the awe and mystery of these ancient times, as well as kind of adding a hint of sadness that these times have passed, where it's like a lot of the story of like the Lord of the Rings is also kind of like the fall of the elves, where you're seeing the final days of elvenkind, and the like the final War of the Ring is really kind of like the last thing that the elves do before like fading and like the great forests of the world receding and the age of man ascending. And it's kind of like these nods to this mythic past. So Gil-galad was an elven king, of him the harpers sadly sing. The last whose realm was fair and free, between the mountains and the sea. His sword was long, his lance was keen, his shining armor afar was seen. The countless stars of heaven's field were mirrored in his silver shield. But long ago he rode away, and where he dwelleth none can say. For into darkness fell his star, into Mordor, where the shadows are. So it's like kind of like referring to like this mythic past and everything, where these like legendary kings who were like often like gone off like these better times and everything, which obviously like Tolkien took back from like a lot of the mythology of like Northern and Western Europe and everything, and a lot of these like but also like a lot of these mythic kings and stuff really calls back from is like kind of like a callback to a lot of the Arthurian myths and things like that, where it's a kind of this parallel where it's like, yes, the days in Britain where it's like we were like the Knights of the Round Table led by King Arthur, and it was a glorious time of like heroes and chivalry, not like nowadays, like back when those stories were written, which were still like the depth of the Middle Ages, back before those blasted French people invaded and changed all the language. 1066, never forget. There's these parallels to like these ancient kings, and it's like the whole thing is like he rode away long ago, and where he dwelleth none can say. We're kind of like that parallel too. And then obviously there's the literal like parallels with the elves, or them sailing to the west and into like the Undying Lands, and it's like King Arthur also sailed into the west, into who knows, into RuneScape apparently, because that's where he is. Yeah, he went to RuneScape. That's what happened. But yeah, no, I could just start gushing about Lord of the Rings for ages if I don't stop now. I gave people also the option for, whatchamacallit. One last note is that, you know what I was talking before, is like the idea of like the Volta and the need for like poetry and stuff. Like in Boa Constrictor, like the need for a Volta for like this very clear thing, like actually Voltas are a lot harder to find, like either in children's poetry, we're going back to Boa Constrictor for a bit, it's either extremely obvious or not really obvious at all. Like, it's like the bird's boa constrictor. It's like, it starts out with, I'm being eaten by a boa constrictor. Like, that does not change the whole thing. And it's like, yeah, I'm still being eaten, I'm being eaten. Where in essays, I would kind of argue that the Volta is like this presumption of like, in children's narrative, like either A, it's the Volta is the change in style where it's changing from like, okay, we're talking about this, talking about this, and it's like, wait, no, it's this like break from this like fantasy of like, I'm telling a poem to like, no, I'm actually getting eaten by a boa constrictor, like I can't finish this poem, and that could be kind of the Volta there. Also this implantation of like in any sort of children's literature, it's like the speaker doesn't die, like something will happen, they'll save, and or like they'll end up safe, and it's like, no, he gets eaten. And it's kind of like that bluntness. It's kind of like that here. For the Fall of Gil-galad, this one's interesting because it isn't the full poem. Like, this is only like the first part, and it's not talking about the full like war and stuff. But that said, like, this is a very easy one also to identify the poem even within this fragment, because it's like first two like stanzas are just like, okay, he's this awesome guy in the land and he has cool armor and shield and stuff, but we don't know where he is anymore. Like, if you see the word but at the beginning of a stanza, that's, or even a line, that's a pretty good sign that that might be a place where the Volta is. So it's obvious we don't know where it is, and that's everything else talking about, like, oh, he was with like all this light, we have like the stars and all that thing and the silver shield, but now he's going into Mordor where the shadows are. And also this kind of thing where it's Mordor where the shadows are or lay is repeated a lot within the poems of the Lord of the Rings, like even within the poem of the Ring itself, and the land of Mordor where the shadows lie is the final line of that one. Where it's kind of like this repetition of that. Okay, so one more option I gave to people was just say a topic. If you didn't want to do that, just have a topic. And I really appreciate that one person just said ladies. Yeah. This poem is by Renee Vivian, which was published in the early 18th century. She was a sapphic poet, and of course I'm going to read poems about lesbians because lesbians. But obviously, early 1900s, not a great time to be an LGBT person. I mean, honestly, not as bad as like the early 20th century and like throughout most of the 20th century, but it's like it's still not great. She had a lover who was also a poet, but we don't actually have much of her lover stuff because her father found it and like burned a lot of it, which sucks. But Renee Vivian, she was in France, and this is the poem, The Touch. The trees have kept some lingering sun in their branches, veiled like a woman, evoking another time. The twilight passes, weeping, my fingers climb, trembling, provocative, the line of your haunches. My ingenious fingers wait when they have found the petal flesh beneath the robe they part. How curious, complex the touch, this subtle art. As the dream of fragrance, the miracle of sound. I follow slowly the graceful contours of your hips, the curve of your shoulders, your neck, your unappeased breasts. In your white voluptuousness, my desire rests, swooning, refusing itself the kisses of your lips. So this is a pretty sad poem because it's talking about like this like it's in many ways kind of like erotic. We're talking like when you're talking about the petal flesh beneath the ropes they part. Like, it's pretty clear what they're talking about. And how curious, complex, the touch, the subtle art. Yeah. But you got to go back to the first two lines. The trees have kept the some lingering sun in their branches, veiled like a woman. This isn't about a woman. This is about this woman, the speaker, the poet, kind of seeing just this image, like just seeing it just like in the flash of like just some sun like through the branches, and like reminds her of her loved one who just isn't with her anymore, and it kind of like talking about like all the ways it reminds her of her body, and just like they're like specifically when it's talking about sex, it's talking about like their like the physical relationship and like the distance apart there, and obviously at the end it's like swooning, refusing the kisses of your lips, and where it's kind of that thing where it's this distance between them and her, where the subject of her love, and it's really a relatable thing if you've ever like loved someone and they're no longer in your life for one reason or another, or at least in your life in that way. It's very relatable, the idea of just like not like seeing them where they aren't, and like having like completely innocuous things where it doesn't have to be like a photograph you find that like sets off like your memories of this person and your feelings for them. It can be just like the sunlight through the trees, which for some reason just sparks something in your mind, and it causes your just memories to surface, and it brings back it all flooding back, and you remember every little bit of it, and it's heartbreaking. Lily, don't cry on camera. But yeah, no, it's really nice. It also has like, if you talk about like the actual like the relationships, especially like with like in this time period where it's like, yeah, then it takes kind of almost like as like when you're like talking about like this, like especially when it was referring, like you could apply that to almost like any sort of like love lost, but like when you start applying it to specifically like LGBT things, whereas like it kind of then takes on a darker note, because it's like what happens to those kind of people, and like the reasons they're separated, especially in this time period, is yeah. So there was one final suggestion, because my mom decided that she needs to be my patron and puts in suggestions to embarrass me every week. I'm not doing a poem for what she suggested, because there are no published poems about what she just suggested, so instead I'm going to tell you a little story. Not really a story, but explain it. She had the story of, she had Little Willard. So Little Willard was this series of like small stuffed dogs. It was a small stuffed dog that Amy had, my little sister, little tiny sister. She's so small. She's in college, but yeah, she's my baby sister. But back when we were little, she had these, she had a little stuffed dog called Little Willard, and both of us loved that dog, and we incorporate into like stories and like things like that, like children do. And then like Amy decided to acquire, like we slowly like started acquiring more Little Willards. It's a long story why they're called Little Willard. There was also a larger version of it, which was like Normal Willard. It was like a smaller version, like Normal Willard. By the end we ended up with 9 of them. And there was lots of like family stories and stuff like that. And things like that where, but yeah, it was just like this thing from our childhood that our parents like to tease us about. But yeah, I'm not doing a poem about them because there are no poems about them. How would I do that? I guess I could find like a poem about like childhood, I guess. I don't know. I should have grabbed one of the Little Willards. That would have been smart. Oh well. But yeah. well, thanks for hanging out with me this evening, and let me indulge just rambling about poetry. I'm not a literature nerd. Like I said, thank you so much to all of my patrons who help support me on Patreon. It really means a lot to me. And if you can't support me financially, thank you so much too. Like, this channel's amazing, I love doing it, and yeah, thank you. I love all of you. And if you want to support me and like get involved in these videos in the future, which I will be caught up soon, I promise, you can support me on the link down in the description. But until next time, I hope you have a wonderful night and a wonderful night's sleep. May your stories smile upon you.